Few stories are as powerful as the stories we tell ourselves. Powerful empires create powerful myths. These myths, these stories, shape societies, shape economies, and even shape the land itself. They profoundly affect the psyche, spirit, and well-being of everyone within the empire's reach. National myths, imperial myths also create silence around uncomfortable truths. The Roman Empire leveled cities, subjugated populations, and installed client rulers all over Europe, Asia, and North Africa. But the Romans thought of themselves as peacemakers and of their rulers as gods. The British Empire likewise thought of itself as a light bringer and liberator, with its agents bringing Christianity and so-called civilization to benighted regions around the globe. But the British were clear that most of their far-flung territories were colonies, and that they, the British, were colonizers. They knew they were extracting wealth. They even celebrated it. But the United States is a little different. In the American imagination, we were never an empire, and we never had colonies. How could we be an empire when our ancestors escaped from an oppressive empire in search of sweet freedom? How could we be colonizers when we rose up against the colonizer king to demand independence and create the world's first modern democracy? The American myth is the myth of original innocence, a myth that to this day allows most white Americans to think that all the wealth of this country is the result of free enterprise and hard work and maybe even God's special blessing. But actually, we are just part of a 500-year colonization story that goes back to Columbus and the European invasion of the Western Hemisphere. The invasion enjoyed the total blessing of the Roman Catholic Church, beginning when Pope Alexander VI proclaimed the doctrine of discovery in 1493. Christians were encouraged to keep the lands they seized for the sake of saving the souls of the colonized. The English Protestants who came to North America also believed that God gave them the land. In New England, they even thought of themselves as the new Israel, and of the Indians as Canaanites who could be conquered, subjugated, or killed in the building of a righteous commonwealth. We were all taught that 1776 was about freedom and self-determination. We were not taught that it was partly about the freedom of white settlers to cross the Appalachian Mountains and seize Indian land in defiance of the Crown's prohibition on such land grabs. Even before independence was achieved, liberty for these white settlers meant exercising what they thought was their God-given right to take control of a vast new continent and replace its original inhabitants. This theft was accomplished by forced assimilation, removal, and outright extermination of native populations. Romantic American narratives about mountain men and brave pioneers cover up an actual history of genocide. One conservative estimate suggests that there were 7 million natives in North America prior to 1492. By 1880, there were 228,000, a decline of 97%. American empire building exposed a foundational difference between the white settlers and the indigenous peoples. The settlers fully intended to own and dominate the space they occupied. It was part of their religion, whereas the people they displaced and killed lived in kinship with all life and rejected the idea of individual ownership as absurd. They lived lives of reciprocity, sustainability, and communal responsibility. All of this was in stark contrast to white settlers for whom land and nature amounted to inert property to be worked and exploited. As the theft and genocide accelerated, the myth-making intensified. In 1845, a New York journalist proclaimed that it was white Americans' manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. Never mind that the so-called free development of the white empire entailed slavery for millions of others who really built the incredible wealth of this nation through centuries of unpaid labor. The Civil War's end only accelerated the genocide. In 1867, General William Tecumseh Sherman of Civil War fame said, "We must act with vindictive earnestness against the Sioux, even to their extermination, men, women, and children." 1 year later, Sherman would give an order permitting the complete annihilation of the tribe. By 1890, the so-called frontier was closed, and the West was won for white settlement. But the colonizing and myth-making would not stop at the Pacific shore. In 1898, the U.S. launched an imperial war against Spain that gave it Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Guam, Cuba, and more. That same year, the U.S. took possession of Hawaii after undermining the monarchy there. In the Philippines, United States troops conducted a brutal counterinsurgency war when the Filipinos declined to accept the blessing of American rule. Our forces perfected waterboarding there. But officially, we were helping our little brown brothers, as U.S. leaders referred to the Filipinos. Apparently unaware that the Filipinos were the only Christian people in Asia, President William McKinley declared that the purpose of our occupation was to uplift and Christianize them. Always and onward into the 20th century, the United States empire would be portrayed by its leaders as a righteous empire, making the world safe for democracy, in the words of President Woodrow Wilson. This was the same president who segregated Washington, D.C., celebrated the Confederacy, and sent U.S. troops into Haiti, Nicaragua, and Mexico. Violence is built into the settler colonial project, and that violence makes its way into the psyches of the colonizers. The greater the violence, the greater the need to sanitize, to proclaim innocence. No one saw this more clearly than the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who put his life and his mission at risk by telling the truth about America in his famous Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence speech of 1967.
And I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghetto without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government.
Our task, then, is to break the silence ourselves, not just to tell the truth about history, but to understand how the myth-making and the persisting violence have touched the minds, bodies, and spirits of both colonizers and colonized alike. Our task is to ask what history requires of us. Our task is to return the stolen land, restore the stolen wealth, and learn to treat one another and all beings with reverence and respect. Our task is to decolonize.